Learning Spanish changed my life, but it wasn't always easy. In 2010, I jumped on a plane and moved over to Barcelona with the one goal of perfecting my Spanish. Now, after 15 years of living and working right here in Barcelona, I get the same questions over and over again. People want to know about my level of Spanish, but they also want to know how long it took me to become fluent, and then finally, what I did to learn Spanish. And today I see all of these learn quickly options that you have out there, and when I reflect back on my experiences, I don't really think that there's some sort of hack that you can do to learn quickly. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and realistically, getting out of your comfort zone. So if you're ready to do that, in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience learning Spanish and how I did it, and what can work for you too. Whenever you're learning any language, I think it's really important to take a step back and reflect a little bit on why you actually want to learn that language, but also the level that you're starting with when you're trying to learn that language, so it'll help you decide what things you should do in order to learn. It's really going to play a big role. For me personally, when I moved over to Barcelona, I would classify myself as conversational. Realistically, when I was 12 years old, I started taking classes. I knew that I was going to be in some after-school programs anyway, and so I told my mom I had to be there after school, that I might as well just start taking the classes, and that was my real first kind of involvement with the Spanish language. Now, something that I had always wanted to do, because my entire dad's side of the family is from Puerto Rico, but I grew up just speaking English. We never spoke in Spanish. So it really was kind of this personal goal of mine to finally be able to learn Spanish, and moving to Barcelona was kind of that big moment for me. Now, starting at 12 and taking different classes, took them through middle school, high school, and even into college. But what I always found was that there was always this big break. You're not completely immersed in it. So moving over became that way for me to be 100% immersed in Spanish and speaking it every single day. Now what's really cool is when I look back to that 22-year-old kid that moved over to Barcelona with the goal of learning Spanish and how far I've come, the fact that I can speak fluently and use it every single day is something that I can take a lot of pride in, to be honest with you. Now, when people ask, are you fluent? Yes, I do say I'm fluent, but that doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. I still make those mistakes, and it is still a journey. So when everybody always asks, how long did it take you to be fluent? I never have a complete answer for you, but I always say that after 5 years, you're not even thinking about it anymore. You're not kind of preparing those questions and answers. When you call somebody on the phone, you're not really prepping everything right before. It does start to be a lot easier just to maintain those conversations. But the one thing that I really wanted to focus on in this video are the things that I did that really helped me make those big strides to becoming fluent, learning that Spanish, and how you can do them as well. Now, the first thing obviously was moving over to Barcelona. And a lot of people always ask, why Barcelona, and don't they speak Catalan there? So Barcelona was not the destination that I needed to move over to. What I really wanted to do was move over to Spain for what I thought would be 1 year. You can see how that worked out 15 years later. But the idea was coming over to Barcelona and maybe seeing if there was another city that I wanted to be in. Just ended up loving Barcelona and deciding to stay. And yes, they do speak 2 languages. But what's been really cool is not only have I been able to learn Spanish, but I've been able to learn Catalan as well. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1. But I always do think, what would have happened if I had moved to another city like Madrid, where the language, the main language every single day is going to be Spanish? Would I have progressed in a different way? Would I have moved a little bit faster in that language learning process? But again, it's still cool to be able to say that now I have 2 languages under my belt. And if you want to hear about my experiences speaking Catalan, leave a comment below and we can do that for another video. Now, I realize that not everybody can just pack up and move to another country and really immerse yourself 100% in not only the culture, but the language, which really does make a difference. But there are some other options that you can do if you don't have that option of moving over to Barcelona. Now, one of the things that you can do is look for those Spanish-speaking neighborhoods right by you, or looking for those opportunities to put yourself in that situation where Spanish is absolutely necessary. There's a lot more than you actually think about, so you can look up some of those different places that are right by you where you can really start to practice that language in a real life experience. If that doesn't work for you, then you can always do some sort of vacation, workation that might be a little bit longer, where you can spend some time in one of those native places where you can really target that language and use it day to day. If you can't move to a Spanish-speaking country, another great option is taking classes, but I always caution knowing the limits to this. Like I told you, I started taking classes around the age of 12 and did it all the way through college. But the one thing that I always found is that I felt like you were kind of checking in and checking out, not only of the class, but also of the language, especially when you're living in a place that the predominant language isn't that target language that you have. For my case, obviously Spanish. But what you would do is you would go in, and maybe for about 50 minutes during the day, you would be speaking Spanish, listening, or even just writing in Spanish. But then once you left, you wouldn't be using that language realistically until the next time you went to class, which could be the next week, the next day, or a couple days after. So it really was this kind of check in, check out, almost like you were punching in a card to learn the language. So think about that when you're signing up for those classes. For example, right now, one of the things that I've been trying to do is learn Italian. It's another little thing that I've always wanted to do since I was young. Not a lot of people know this, but I was actually born in Italy, so kind of just knowing the language would be a cool thing to do. But one problem that I've been finding is that when you have group classes, you have a very fixed schedule, and that becomes very hard to be able to coordinate around and find a place to go. The other thing is private classes, which can be a little bit more adaptable to what you need, but they can be much more expensive. Classes are a great way where you can really go and target specific language, but I haven't always found one that really feels like it's a full immersion into what you want to get out of it, which is more than anything conversational and that speaking and that real life application. But that's until now. Now, I don't have a lot of time to do classes these days, and I can't just pack up and move like when I was 22. And that's why I've partnered with Lingoda to start my Italian language journey. What I really like about Lingoda is the flexibility and their focus on real life application, giving you the chance to jump right in and have those real conversations fast. They also have real teachers that you can book for either group or private lessons that provide feedback and even a learning report at the end of each lesson. Lingoda has 2 different learning plans. The Flex plan, which I'm using, allows you to learn at your own pace, and they have classes basically 24/7. Just the other day I booked a class in between meetings just to get a little more practice in. And they also have the Sprint plan, which gives you the options to really go all in a 2-month span and even has prizes for you. And right from the beginning, you'll be using your target language to practice. Here's a little clip from my very first class.
Patrick, che lingue parli?
Parlo inglese, spagnolo e catalano.
E catalano. E scusate, ho scritto Chicago con la C. Ok, Chicago. E anche catalano, certo. Ok.
You've got nothing to lose by just trying it out. You can sign up for free with Lingoda's free trial period for some group or private classes and just give it a test. And if you finally want to sign up for some more classes, you can use my discount code PATRICK20, which is going to give you 20 euros off on any of the language learning lessons. Now, when I moved out to Barcelona, I had never been here before and I really didn't know anyone. But fortunately, I had the contact of a friend who I had met a couple times and had actually studied abroad at the same university that I did, that when I got out here, I was able to meet up with him, and he was nice enough to introduce me to a group of his friends that we ended up spending a lot of time together, and that's how I became a Barca fan as well, watching all of those games, all of those clásicos that first year that I was here. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have native speaking friends and to speak to them in that target language. For me, it helped so much learning Spanish, even learning Catalan. Now, one of the big problems when you move out to a new country, a lot of times is meeting people. Fortunately, with all of the internet and social media and everything, there are a lot easier ways to meet some people. There's even some great programs that people have set up to do some specific language learning where you can do some language exchanges individually or in a group, doing all sorts of different activities that'll really help. But the one thing that you need to remember, and one thing that I'd really tried to do, especially that first year that I was out here, was not fall back in the comfort zone of speaking English, really going and just speaking in Spanish 100% of the time. That later was really going to help me out with Catalan as well. Now, I was also very fortunate because playing basketball out here, I was able to train in Spanish or in Catalan, And with all the teammates, it was a really easy way to meet some people, but you still have all of those different things. And out here, Barcelona, Meetup is a really good option to make sure that you're meeting all sorts of different people. But there are some things that you do need to know if you are going to go for that target language. And this is where I say getting out of your comfort zone is something that you need to be really comfortable with, because you are going to miss out on a lot. Those jokes are not going to be as funny. You won't really maybe get all of them, and you might feel a little bit out of place at times, but you really got to continue to push through that. Make sure that you are engaging and really listening and not checking out all the time. It is something that is a little bit different, much harder, and I do know a lot of people that have moved out here and really just never learned the language because they've always found groups of people that speak their native language and kind of stuck to those. It is something that really does help change the game in terms of your language learning, and where I saw a lot of growth. Now, if you want to take that language learning to the next level, not just having Spanish friends, but you need to get a Spanish partner. Now, I really wish I could quote wherever I heard this the first time, but it always just kind of sticks out in my mind. You learn more in the sheets than you do in the streets. Now, all joking aside, realistically, it is something that really does let you learn so much, because you have that one person that you can go to and that you're constantly speaking in Spanish. Now, for me, my girlfriend is from here and we do speak Spanish at home. So now, from that little kid who wanted to learn Spanish and speak it at home but wasn't able to, now my home language is Spanish. Yes, we do occasionally speak in English or maybe even Catalan, depending on kind of the groups that we're in, but predominantly what we're doing is we're speaking in Spanish. Now, at the beginning, it was a little bit more difficult because I was always kind of at the disadvantage, if you will, with language or anything like that. And for arguments, wasn't going to win anyway, but it didn't help that I couldn't defend myself all the time. But what happens is that you're going to be able to have those real conversations. You're going to be able to speak to that person every single day about more complex things as well. And so that's something that really does change everything. Also, it's someone that can correct you when you make those mistakes. And like I said before, while I've become fluent, there's still going to be times when you make mistakes. So even though it is a little bit annoying, times when I make mistakes in the subjunctive form. Who hasn't made mistakes in the subjunctive when you learn Spanish? My girlfriend's able to correct me. So that is, for all the good and the bad, that is something that really did help with my Spanish. I remember my first year out here while I was teaching English that I asked one of my students who her favorite actor of all time was, and her response was Robin Williams. So when I asked her if she had watched the movies in English or Spanish, I was really surprised when she told me that she had watched all of the movies in Spanish. For me, that's kind of like not even seeing Robin Williams for real. The whole genius of him was his voice and everything that he was able to do with those imitations. But with everything being dubbed out here, it makes a lot of sense. You can turn on the TV basically at any time of the day, especially when I moved out here, and you would see The Big Bang Theory dubbed, and it's always super weird to see some of your favorite actors or some of your favorite TV shows or things that you've seen before with a different voice. I'm not gonna lie, I really hated it at the beginning, but it's something I've become a lot more accustomed to. And one of the things that you should do if you really want to learn the language is you should be watching series, you should be watching movies in Spanish. Now, a lot of times the movie title is going to be completely different, but just having that dubbed version is going to be strange as well. One of the big things though is that now the Spanish movies, the Spanish television series are getting much better. Casa de Papel, Money Heist was a big series all around the world that got a lot of people watching Spanish series. You can watch that in the original language, and one of the big things that you should do, especially at the beginning, is just put those subtitles there. It's something that always helps a little bit. To be honest with you, there's sometimes I'm watching movies in English that I have to put subtitles in because you can't hear completely. So when you're using a second, a third language, it's always much better to have those subtitles down there that can give you an idea of what they're saying. Now, when I'm watching, I still even put on those subtitles, despite the fact that I understand what's going on. What's really annoying is when they don't translate with the subtitles the same as they've dubbed, so you get to see these different words. Now it's really nice because I actually do get to see different versions of how you could say, or different ways of saying the exact same thing as you're checking both of them out. Watching those series, watching those movies in Spanish is always something that is really good to develop that ear and understand the different sounds and everything, and the speech patterns more than anything. You can hear all sorts of different accents as well that really do help depending on what you're watching. But it is really annoying when you have to go back, rewind, because you feel like you've missed out on a big part of what you're viewing. Now, I always feel like it's really hard when you have somebody else giving you that information, something that you really can't control. Even if your level isn't the best, you can control a little bit better what you're saying than what you're hearing all the time. So one of the things that really helped me when I moved out here is reading. I think that reading is one of the best ways, not only that you can learn new words, vocabulary, and everything like this, but you can actually see the language and how it's constructed. Now, I understand that reading is something that is much more difficult to do than just sit back, throw on Netflix, and watch something in Spanish, but it is something that for me personally just really changed everything in terms of understanding the language. But it is a lot more difficult because it is something that you have to actively be doing. Now, when I first moved out here, one of the things that I was doing every single day was taking the train to and from Sant Cugat and Barcelona. Now, on this about 30-minute train ride, what I wanted to do is I always wanted to be reading in Spanish. And a lot of people ask me what kind of books they should be reading in Spanish if they want to improve. Now, what I would start with, basic things if you've never read in Spanish before, is actually starting with something that maybe you've already read, a book that you know really well, and something that you almost don't even have to follow the storyline as much. You kind of know what's going on, but it also allows you to kind of continue moving along in the book, so you're not stopping and starting and everything. But one of the things that I was doing when I started reading 100% in Spanish was that I had a dictionary with me. Back when I moved over here, I didn't have internet all the time, so I wasn't able to just kind of call up, the Spanish dictionary and check it out. But what I had when I was sitting on the train, if you can imagine, I had the book open, and in the back I had a dictionary. So every time I didn't know a word, what I would do is I would circle, highlight, underline it, and I would look it up. Then I would add it to a list of new words that I had been learning, and a lot of times what you're gonna see is with those books, you're gonna see the authors using the same words over and over again. So that really starts to put it into your own vocabulary. Now, it is really annoying to start and stop reading so often, but it is something that really did make a difference for me. Starting with those easier books, maybe something you know before you graduate on to something a little bit newer. But start with even books that are not written for your level. Start with young adult books. Some of the books that I started reading were Carlos Ruiz Zafón, who wrote Shadow of the Wind, my favorite book of all time, but his earlier works, his young adult novels. And those, while maybe not the best books he's written, those are things that I just really appreciate being able to read to really start that journey. And one of the first things that I did when I moved out here is I turned all of my phone settings into Spanish. This is by far the easiest thing that you can do, but the reasoning behind it was really kind of making myself think in Spanish from the beginning of the day. Whenever I woke up and turned on my phone, looked at it, working through the day, I was doing all of those things in Spanish. Now, I will caution that if you do want to return it to the original language, you do need to remember how you got to the language change to Spanish in the first place, just so that you can always go back very easily. But it is something that I felt like really did help out, even if it was much more of an internal thing. Now, I haven't done that yet with Italian, and years ago I did that when I was really trying to push Catalan and start to think in that a whole lot more. But it is, like I said before, one of the easiest things that you can do, and it doesn't require a whole lot of jumping out of that comfort zone. And as I start my journey learning Italian and really think about all those things that I did to push myself to get to that next level with Spanish, I realized all the hard work that went into it. But looking back over the years, how rewarding all of that is, and even caught myself having a Duolingo streak that's gone for over a year with the start to learn Italian, thinking that it was going to be one of those kind of quick fixes. The problem was that when I was talking to somebody the other day from Italy and had told them that I had been learning Italian, I couldn't answer some of the most basic questions. And I feel like after a full year, you should be able to answer a lot of those things, but I didn't have the tools necessary to do it. While I could tell them that I knew there was a strange woman standing next to the window, I couldn't tell them where I was born. We hadn't even gotten to that part. Now, this is not a diss of Duolingo at all, and I found that you can actually really pick up some vocabulary words along the way. But what I really think in terms of learning a language is really immersing yourself 100% into it and getting that real life application. So if you can't move out to Barcelona to learn Spanish like I did and want to start learning right away, Click on my link below to save 20 euros on Lingoda's courses and learn smarter, not harder.